Welcome to another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk PBA. I'm CJ Hutter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandemore, the sergeant at arms of the PBA.
And today we're excited to have New York State Senator James Skoufis on with us. Thanks for coming on, Senator.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit, because you're not one of our local senators. You're from the upstate area, or some people call it mid-state, lower state, whatever. Anything north of the Bronx is upstate to me.
I understand.
So tell us a little bit about your journey into politics, so our viewers get to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I'm in Orange County, and to your point, we're actually in the MTA region. And so for anyone north of us, we're downstate. For you guys, I understand we're upstate. But this is my 8th year in the state Senate. I was 6 years, 3 terms in the state assembly before that. I was a commuter, like a lot of folks in Suffolk County, to New York City. Non-political job, project management. I was on the town board in Woodbury at that time. Some of your folks probably have shopped at Woodbury Commons.
Oh, yeah,
where,
it's beautiful.
That's where I grew up. And I represent a community or a set of communities similar to out here in Suffolk County.
Absolutely.
It's a mix of suburban, exurban, and some rural. And it's a very moderate, politically speaking, very moderate place. In fact, I represent the most Republican district held by a Democrat in the state Senate.
Wow.
And what a lot of people look for in my community are, I think, a lot of what your membership and the residents of Suffolk County look for, which is just common sense out of government. What I tell people is 95% of New Yorkers do not want government to solve all the world's problems. Mm-hmm. They want repaved roads. They want safe communities and laws that help you all who patrol our communities and enforce the law succeed in enforcing the law. If you've got kids, you want good schools. If you get sick, you want good hospitals, and you want some tax relief. Like 95% of people, that's all they want from government.
Right.
And that's what I really focus on as a state senator. I've been allies of the Suffolk County PBA, even though this is my first time in your building, for a long time. And I'm just thrilled to be here with you guys today.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. And I appreciate you making those comparisons to your home area to Suffolk County, because I've thought the same thing. I've stopped in the Woodbury Commons before, beautiful area. And I think that common sense is the message we try to push here all the time.
Yeah.
Like we have representatives from both sides of the aisle on this show regularly. And, Tanner and I have spoken extensively about trying to bring politics back towards the middle, being able to have peaceful conversations and debate rather than this rhetoric you see from the far left and the far right, because both sides have their extremists that sometimes people get labeled as unfairly.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we were just talking about this before we went live. You had the Tea Party movement occur in the Republican Party during the Obama years. And we're seeing the pendulum swing really, really hard left right now in the Democratic Party.
Right.
We saw the primaries that just happened in New York a little bit ago. And, what I'm describing it as is, it is a pendulum. When the other guys are in power, Trump's in the White House, Republicans control Congress, the pendulum does swing back the other way, but it's swung back so hard, the pendulum has detached itself from the clock at this point. And so, we do have to be mindful. I am a Democrat. I believe in democratic values, but right now there are a lot of people who view those values very differently in my party, and we're having that debate. And look, it's good we have that debate, but we have to be mindful that, again, the vast, vast, vast majority of people who we ultimately look to represent in these elections, whether you're Republican or Democrat, they are responsive to the issues I mentioned before.
Right.
They're not responsive to these fringe matters that I think sometimes get elevated in these primaries. Because keep in mind, whether you're a Republican primary or it's a Democratic primary, it's like 5 to 10% of those party members who come out and vote.
Right.
And they're oftentimes the loudest. They're oftentimes the most advocacy driven. And they may not be reflective, those values, of the broader electorate. And that's when you sometimes get in trouble when you ultimately look to November, when you have a much larger group of folks who are coming out to vote.
I'm glad you brought that up, because those are the people that are motivated to go out. And I think that a lot of the moderates, especially what's happening right now, a lot of the moderates are staying home. They don't want to get caught up in all these issues, but they don't feel as motivated as these people with these crazy agendas that they want to push through.
Tom Swazi had an interesting quote that's accurate right after the New York State primaries that just occurred, and he said while folks in the middle of the Democratic Party are complaining about the Democratic Socialists of America at events and cocktail parties and everything else, DSA, they're organizing.
Right.
And so like that's ultimately an issue that I think we have to contend with in the Democratic Party is, for those of us who are on the center left, and look, there's some issues that I'm more progressive on. There's some issues that I'm more center left on. One of the things I take a lot of pride in is that people can't box me into specific, categories of labels. But for those of us who feel that the Democratic Party should represent mainstream values and priorities and issues, we have to do a better job organizing and just, stop with just the complaining because the other guys, they are organizing. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great message because, like you said, we just saw a handful of primaries in the Democratic Party. We were out there in strong support of Thomas DiNapoli, the comptroller who was primaried against by some of these fringe people from the DSA, Jessica Scarcella-Spanton over in Staten Island. And we were able to at least get some more support behind those people in these primaries because it's hard to get those more centric voters out for those primaries.
That's right. And I'm thrilled that you guys were helping those two candidates. Tom DiNapoli I've known for a very long time, and he's a great friend to anyone with a pension here in New York State, for sure.
Of course.
And has certainly been, even otherwise, just a really terrific public servant for a long time. And obviously a Long Island native.
Yes.
With you guys as well. And Jessica Scarcella-Spanton is a phenomenal colleague. And it really underscores another point here, which is that and this works on the Republican side as well, depending on where you are. Suffolk County Democrats are not the same as Western Queens Democrats, where you had some of these, hot primaries. Mm-hmm. They're not the same as Manhattan Democrats. Orange County Democrats are not the same as, some of these regions of the state that we're talking about. And certainly Staten Island Democrats, where Senator Scarcella-Spanton represents, are just not the same by and large as Democrats in Suffolk County and some other places. And so, it's also important to just be mindful of that. The results from this recent primary, people who have concerns, which look, I'm mindful of this, but people who have concerns about where the Democratic Party is headed should not overly extrapolate too much from results that happened in Astoria, Queens, in the Democratic primary, or Lower Manhattan in the Democratic primary, where there was another contentious election. What came out of those primaries probably are not going to come out of a primary out in Suffolk County. You've got a great senator here in Monica Martinez. She had a primary a couple of years ago.
Yes,
she did.
Right,
yes.
And you didn't have these same elements and dynamics because the primaries out here are very different than the primaries in New York City where we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it is important to continue to stress that we still pride ourselves in Suffolk County of having very moderate electeds, right? Our Democrats here are the old school working class Democrats that you think of when you were going through elementary school and learning about how the country works, at least for anybody in my age bracket. And the vast majority of our Republicans here are very moderate Republicans too. And our Democrats and Republicans very often work hand in hand. They both come out and support police and public safety issues because, as you put it, that's what a lot of our people out here in the suburbs care about.
Yeah, that's right. And, the Democratic Party has a reputational problem as a result of sort of the national brand, right? And that trickles down. And by the way, the Republican Party is not much better. And, I'd say maybe they're 5 or 10 percentage points in terms of favorability apart. But underscoring what you just said, CJ, is that one of the issues, one of the perceptions is that, and there's some reality to it, is that the National Democratic Party has moved away from working class priorities. Right. And once people feel that to be true, they start reconsidering their allegiance and who they're predominantly voting for. And over the past, this is not just 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. This is a 10 to 20 year issue that I think the National Democratic Party has been grappling with and not grappling well with, and that is that we've allowed the folks on the ends who dominate in these primaries, the 5%, the 10% who come out in the primaries, to dominate 80 to 90% of the discourse within our national party. And by the way, the Republican Party is similar, and a lot of that is driven by gerrymandering, unfortunately, because a lot of folks, elected officials, they're less worried about the November election than they are about primaries because their district is so gerrymandered. So they run to the left, they run to the right because they're worried about a primary. But one example I'll give just from the Democratic Party, and I mentioned this, I ran for DNC chair last year. I talked about exactly this.
I'm glad you bring this up because I wanted to get to this.
I ran for DNC chair because I believe in the Democratic Party, but I also believe the Democratic Party has to learn lessons and has to change. And one of the lessons I've talked a lot about is in the last presidential election, a lot of, not all, but a lot of elements in the National Democratic Party, when someone brought up the border and they had concerns about the border and the safety of the border and the immigration that was, I think we have to admit, under the Biden years was a major problem. Yeah. There were too many Democrats around the country, the political class, who whenever an average voter brought up this issue, they were quick to, oh, well, that's racist. That's not racist. That's not racist. But that's a genuine concern. You have to talk with these individuals like they're human beings, and they're, they've got genuine concerns. And by the way, it was a problem. But too many people, they say knee jerk. Well, that's racist. That's an issue within the Democratic Party. And I want to be abundantly clear. I view the National Republican Party as having major problems and issues as well. But we have to reflect on how we can do better. And that's something that I've tried to bring to my job in Orange County. And it's why I believe I'm able to win in a challenging district like mine. I
just want to bring up a reflection of you. I'm glad you brought up the part about the working party, the working class people, because I think that that's very true, especially with the socialists that are kind of combining themselves with the Democrats. But I think that a reflection of you is really like the results in 2022 when Lee Zeldin was on the ballot and the Republicans were really dominating in some of the other down ballot districts. And I think he won your area about like 14%, right? 14 points. And you won that area by 2%. So it's a 16% swing in the other direction because Republicans aren't maybe voting for the Republican senator. They're now voting for you. And the independent voters, I think there's a lot of, we call them blanks now. There's no independent party anymore. But there's a lot of people that feel independent because of the things you brought up. A lot of people don't agree with either party and they don't think they're being run correctly. And they don't think that they support them, the voter.
That's right. And it's a good point. And the gap was even bigger this past time around in the presidential race. Donald Trump, who's won my district 3 times now, Donald Trump won my district by 14%, or rather 12%, and I won by 14%. So that was a 26-point gap we're talking about. You had lots of lawns with Trump and Skoufis signs on them in Orange County. And to your point, and look, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump for a lot of reasons. But what people, I think the reason why primarily a lot of voters were drawn to Donald Trump, and a lot of those same voters voted for me, is because we both speak about how government has been broken, right? And that's not a Democratic or Republican point of view. That I believe to be a factual statement is that government, in many ways, DC certainly, DC is completely broken. I mean, people have speculated that, I might run for Congress someday. And I used to want to be in Congress. I tell people now, I don't want to be in Congress. It would take me 10 years to rename a post office if I were a member of Congress. Seriously. I'd be losing my mind. Yeah. I'd be leaving my family every other day to do what? Literally nothing. I'd be in a cube fundraising because that's what they do, in these swing-year districts is they don't pass laws. They don't pass bills. They don't go to committee meetings. They fundraise in a cube in their party headquarters down the street. I passed 91 bills last year. I passed 80-something bills this year. And so, DC is fundamentally broken, and it's sad. It's tragic. We're laughing here, but it is really tragic how broken our national government is.
It's a real world problem.
It is.
Yeah.
No, and state government, look, we pass a lot of bills, and I know we're going to talk about some legislation a little bit later. We enact a lot of laws. We actually have to pass a balanced budget every year. Unlike the federal government, we are mandated in our state constitution to pass a budget every year, and we do. And so we actually do a lot, but certainly there are significant elements of government that are broken. The example that I frequently offer on this is we have anyone that's been to the Capitol, it's a beautiful Capitol building, right, that we have in Albany. There's a big exterior staircase at the Capitol building that has been closed for about a decade or so, I want to say. And only last year did the green construction fence finally go up, and there's a project to rehabilitate, repair this beautiful exterior staircase. And do you know how much that project has cost to repair a staircase in New York State, and how long it's going to take to repair that staircase in New York State? $70 million and 5 years.
Oh my God.
We literally put a man on the moon faster than we are rebuilding a staircase in New York State. So anyone that can look at that and not take away, like, yeah, there's something a little bit wrong with New York State and like how this all works, is living on another planet, speaking of the moon. And so I speak to those types of issues. I say like, hey, we can do a lot better. I'm not just reading from a party script to try and convince people that like, oh, everything is fine and dandy here in New York State. There are some things we do really well. There are some things that are really broken. Mm-hmm. And that's why Donald Trump won, I believe. He wasn't just focus testing, hey, what are the things that, the Republican Party wants me to tell voters? He just spoke his mind. Now, I don't like a lot of what's on his mind, but people recognize that he was just speaking his mind. And similarly, when it comes to state government, I try and provide people the truth.
Yeah. So I think it says a lot about you walk the walk. You're not just talking the talk here and telling us and law enforcement and Suffolk County residents what we want to hear, because you win in that red district as a Democrat. And the people that live there in that suburban area recognize that you are fighting on the correct side of a lot of these issues in their point of view for what's going to help them and your constituents. And you're not necessarily just aligning yourself with a party line. You're doing what is right for the people you represent.
That's right. And I would encourage, because again, a lot of, and it's easy to do, I get it, a lot of the perception that voters have about these down ballot candidates, and I'll focus on Democrats again, is it comes from their perceptions of the national party.
Right.
And I get it. And it's easy. But I really encourage people to look past that if they can, and look at Monica Martinez and understand that, she is not a byproduct of the National Democratic Party. She's someone who is hyper-focused on local issues, supports law enforcement, is more moderate, and that is someone that we want up in Albany in the room with the rest of the Senate Democratic Conference to help bring some common sense to that room. By the way, if you lose a Monica Martinez and you replace her with a Republican, guess what you just did? You took one of the moderates out of the room when the decisions are being made, replace them with someone who's not even in the room. Because let's be real, if we're talking brass tacks here, Democrats run New York State government.
Right. No
surprise to anybody, none of your listeners. It's just a matter of fact. And that's whether people like it or not. And I get it. Some people don't like that.
Right.
Right? But that's just a fact. And it's not like a 1-seat majority or a 2-seat majority. These are super majorities we're talking about here.
Yeah. You need Democratic support to get any bills passed that you really want to turn into law.
That's right. And so I implore people, send us in Albany, my conference that I'm a part of, the Senate Democratic Conference. I want more common sense in that conference. And so if you've got a common sense Democrat running for Senate, same thing for Assembly, give them some thought and attention, even if you don't like the National Democratic Party. Now, look, you might make the judgment that you still don't want to vote for them. Okay, fine. But at least give it some attention, even if you don't like what the National Democrats are doing. And so that would be, one of the sort of imparting asks, maybe some wisdom. I've been in Albany now for 14 years, but that's how it works in Albany. It's just a matter of fact.
Right. And in that same line of thought, we talk extensively on this show about police officer mental health. And the importance of peer support. We just had Miguel and Vicky on one of our episodes recently, Dr. Goldfarb on one of our episodes recently. And we've been working very hard here in Suffolk County to stop the stigma, make sure our members know that there are resources out there for them, because our guys are responding to hundreds, if not sometimes thousands, of critical incidents throughout their career.
Yeah.
If you're working 20 to 30 years as a police officer, you're going to respond to a lot more traumatic incidents than the regular citizen out there. And being a moderate Democrat and supporting law enforcement and the issues that we care a lot about, you've sponsored and helped get into law the Lieutenant Joe Banish bill to help our peer support and our mental health. Yeah,
that's right. And this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And you guys were a big part of this effort. Certainly the Nassau County PBA was a big part of this effort. And, one of their former members had, took his life, very tragic situation, Lieutenant Banish. Mm-hmm. And we created legislation to try and do something about this. And it took a couple years. I think 3 years maybe it took since we introduced the bill. And basically, and this was startling when it was brought to my attention. I had no idea. I think the average person has no idea that you've got these peer-to-peer specialists. Mm-hmm. A lot of people know that those exist. And it's not just police. There are fire service agencies that have peer service specialists, EMS, same thing. Almost any first responder, to your point, you are responding to calls that are unimaginable to the average person in some cases, right? And they're traumatic. Someone is maimed. You visit someone's home and there's domestic violence, or worse, someone's been killed, right? And there is psychological trauma that builds from responding to calls like that. And so when a cop goes and sees one of these peer support specialists, what I didn't know is that those conversations are not confidential.
Right.
They're not legally bound in the same way that if you go and talk to a psychiatrist in New York State, you go and talk to a mental health licensed expert, those are legally confidential conversations. They can't enter a courtroom, and you can speak plainly and openly, and nothing can be used against you outside of that room. That same legal protection didn't extend to these peer-to-peer trained specialists. It was startling to me to learn that. So that's what the bill provided for. When you have these conversations, they're legally protected in the same way as when you're talking to these other types of specialists, these licensed professionals. And why is that important? It might seem like a small change to people, but it's really important. And here's why. And you guys know this. Because without that legal protection, a lot of people don't go and have the conversation.
Correct.
Right. And so let's be real here. Law enforcement is a male-dominated profession, and a lot of the guys are very prideful, right? And they don't want to go talk to a shrink. Mm-hmm. They don't want to go talk to, a psychiatrist for whatever reason. And I'm not casting judgment on whatever those reasons are, but it's just true, right? They will talk to a fellow cop.
Right.
But once they find out, oh, well, I just responded to this call and I'm not legally protected if I have this conversation. A lot of them don't have the conversation. Mm-hmm. And now they are having the conversations because we passed this bill and we do have those same legal protections.
Yeah, and that's a great, huge step forward. I'll call it a leap forward. We're very fortunate here in Suffolk County where we have a psychiatrist that works directly with us, Dr. Goldfarb. He's great. Our members know that he's a resource available to them. But to your point, throughout the state, there are plenty of police departments that do not have that.
Yeah.
And even on our own job, a lot of guys and girls might be more comfortable just talking to their partner in the car next to them.
That's right.
Right. I have a great appreciation for your awareness on this issue, because a lot of people I don't know if they don't care or they don't necessarily know the way that police officers are. And I think that you hit it on the head when you say, like, a lot of cops might not want to go to a shrink, but a lot of cops feel very comfortable talking to another cop. It's one of those professions that's very different from a lot of other professions where I feel like as a cop, you feel like the guy that works next to you knows what you're going through. And that makes a huge difference.
That's right.
Yeah, it's right. You know, our job is not like many other jobs. You know, there are plenty of people out there that work hard for a living and, you know, provide valuable services to their communities. But first responders, it's different. You know, when you pull up to a car accident and you see an innocent child DOA in a car, or when you pull up to a family's house because their child's not breathing and it ends up being a sudden infant death case. Those are the things that always stuck with me in my career. Like I'm very open about it. I'm a father. And when I've seen children get hurt or killed, that's the stuff that bothers me for months at a time.
It's PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, when we talk about PTSD, it's usually as it relates to veterans, right? And they certainly have, if they've served in conflict, especially, they come back, a lot of them with PTSD, and, you know, people are killed in their presence. And similarly, it's no different.
Right.
This is real PTSD that you're talking about. You know, showing up and there's a child who is maimed or killed. Like, that sits with you, I imagine, psychologically, not just for months, forever. Yeah. Right? And it's how do you deal with it? It sits with you forever, but then what do you do after that to deal with it?
No, absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I say months because I would literally lose sleep over it for months.
Yeah.
But it does sit with you forever. Like, I still talk about it. Some of these things 15 years ago.
Yeah. So this bill was a really big deal, and I credit the governor. She signed it without question. And that was at a time when the governor and I were really fighting last year, and she was taking a harder look at some of my bills that were passing. This one, though, was you know, even despite some of that conflict, and right now we're in a better place. But, you know, this one, for her, to her credit, there was never an issue with, and it's you know, one of the things that I remind people, not just on this issue, but on a lot of issues, people don't see what doesn't happen, right? Everyone sees what happens because it happened. This bill is going to save lives. This law is going to save lives. And people won't see that because the lives will be saved, and, you know, the suicide or whatever it is will not have happened.
Right.
And so it's impossible to measure because the thing didn't happen, but this law is going to save lives. Right,
absolutely. And that we talk about that sort of effect often because we'll talk about our guys and girls that are out there on patrol preventing crimes from ever actually happening.
Right.
You can't quantify a prevented crime because of your omnipresence.
That's right.
You only know about the ones that actually occur.
That's right. Same thing.
Yeah, it's the same concept.
Yep.
So this was a great step in the right direction. I am glad to hear that Governor Hochul was able to get right on board with this. And even though you guys may have had a little bit of tiff going on in the past, she was able to look past that maybe personal issue going on and sign a good bill into law.
That's right. Big deal. Big deal
absolutely
for everybody.
Yep. So, you know, and along that same vein, you obviously have an understanding for some of our mental health issues that we deal with and some of our concerns. So you also currently are sponsoring a bill that will recognize suicide as a potential line of duty death if it's following a PTSD diagnosis or traumatic incident.
That's right. And it is in that same vein, right? And there's no reason in my mind, because again, the trauma is real and deep, and it can, and it does lead to some members of law enforcement. It just overwhelms them.
Right.
And they take their life. And we have to do everything we can, and we're talking about some of those ways that we can to prevent that. But we're never going to completely prevent it. We're never going to bring the number down to zero, tragically. You know, there are people who just, you know, they're built differently and they absorb that trauma differently, even if they get treatment, even if they get counseling. You know, tragically, there's never going to be no suicides in society. And so when you've got someone in law enforcement who's responding to these types of calls and tragically does take their life, their family needs to be provided for. And they took their life because of their job. And so that needs to be recognized. It unfortunately is not universally recognized. And that's in this space, in this mental health first responder space, that's the next step in my mind.
And I think it's important to recognize that it's not always just one event, and then all of a sudden that police officer
It builds.
starts to have a hard time, and you could pinpoint exactly where it started. It's the course of hundreds of events over the course of a career.
That's right.
Right. So
That's
these
right.
things pile up on you, and it becomes difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I think there's this misconception that some people have. The majority of the public, I feel, deeply appreciates, and rightfully so, the work and at times, oftentimes, very difficult work that law enforcement does. There's a segment of society that thinks, like, you know, whether you're a firefighter or you're a police officer, like, you're responding to calls to get like kittens out of trees.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, these calls are like very serious sometimes,
Yes.
right? Oftentimes, and you know, the law needs to reflect that fact and the trauma that sometimes these calls impose on the police officers who respond to them. And so that's what this bill looks to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate your support on all those mental health acts that you're trying to put forward and back us up on, because it does mean a lot.
Yeah.
We get involved in a lot of these political races to be able to support elected officials that are going to give us the tools we need to properly do our job. And that also includes giving us the tools we need to take care of each other.
Yes, and make sure we don't take away the tools.
Correct.
That you have.
Correct. I'm glad you brought that up.
And
Yes.
I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit too. And I want to say it dovetails into one other point that I mentioned, which is that people don't see what doesn't happen, right? There are two bills I want to mention that are in my committee. So I chair the investigations committee in the state Senate. And it's a committee that has a very diverse set of issues that come to it. Two of the bills that I've blocked from advancing in my committee as chairman. One, repealing qualified immunity, which
Thank
would be
God.
devastating to police forces around this state. In fact, I don't know who in their right mind would sign up to become a police officer.
Exactly.
If we did away with qualified immunity. I've blocked that bill, and that's something that comes up from some people every single year. And then the second, which is not directed at your membership, but certainly a ton of folks who live in Suffolk County would be impacted. There's another bill that is frequently pushed that I block in my committee that would require anyone serving in the NYPD from needing to be a resident of New York City.
Oh, wow.
And that'd be devastating in my area in the Hudson Valley, and it would be devastating on Long Island.
Absolutely.
In your region of the state. And so that's another, and again, people, they don't see or talk about too much in the public about those bills, because they don't move. But there's a reason why they don't move. They're in my committee.
Right. And that's a great point too, because Tanner and I both started our careers in the NYPD, as did a lot of Suffolk County police officers. And when I was there, it seemed like about half of the force, and I was a Queens cop at the time, so it was a common borough to try to work in for people commuting from Long Island. But it seemed like at least half of my precinct, maybe more than half, was from Nassau or Suffolk County. Yeah. Right. We were commuters, going in, working in the city, taking pride in the job we do. But if the city limited themselves to only hiring city residents, that's about half their current job that wouldn't have even been eligible to take the job to begin with. And then what are you doing to your applicant pool? And if you shrink down that applicant pool, you're going to get a less qualified pool to pull from, to say it politely. And we're having a national recruitment crisis as it is. Yeah. Right. There are jurisdictions all over the country that have been lowering standards to even be able to hire people to fill the vacancies. We've been fortunate enough in Suffolk County to not lower any standards yet. We're maintaining our high standard of hiring. One of the things we've done to try to increase recruitment is we're going to be giving the test more often. There used to be 4-year gaps between our civil service tests. Wow. Now there's going to be a 2-year gap between civil service tests. So that's going to, we hope, help with recruitment.
Even that's a long time, by the way. I'm kind of
2 years
surprised to hear that. Yeah.
But when you look at our peak recruitment about 2 decades ago versus our last test a few years ago, we've seen a 67% drop in applicants.
Wow.
And that's in Suffolk County, which is largely considered the gold standard of police jobs. We had over 40,000 applicants decades ago. Now 13,000 took our last test. And so that's a telling sign, and that's a scary thing for America.
And, one of the arguments for the residency bill is, well, we want people in that community, in the New York City community, to be policing their own community, and they'll be more sensitive to, things that go on. And my response to that is, in addition to all the points that you just made, which are factually true, the other point is, so, okay, you're fine with someone in Bay Ridge going up and policing the Bronx? Like, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Brooklyn, totally different
right.
types of residents and totally different types of neighborhoods, totally different types of socioeconomic demographics. That would be perfectly fine. But the guy just across the border in the next county coming and policing in Queens, that's a problem?
Yeah, right. It doesn't make sense.
Makes no sense.
Defies logic.
Also, when we took the test, the NYPD test was like every day. You could take it like almost every day.
Literally every day. It was like
you could take it whenever you wanted. So if anybody from the city wanted to take the test, they could just go take the test and get hired if it's that easy. But there should be high standards on this job, because there's high standards when you go out there, and the public has high standards of you when you go out there. They expect the best from their police officers.
That's right.
Right. And that brings me right back to qualified immunity. So blocking any bill that would repeal qualified immunity, that's huge for anybody who's a police officer, right? One of the misconceptions about qualified immunity is that it protects dirty cops. It doesn't. Qualified immunity is there to protect the cop who's out there trying to do the right thing, acting in good faith within the scope of his employment. Right. And we work in a very it's a very active field, right? Things are constantly evolving. Things are constantly changing. We're very reactive. So when we take action, it's always in reaction to somebody else's initial action. If people start hesitating to take police action, right? If cops are out there worried about losing their house, whatever money they have saved up for retirement, anything of value that they personally own, nobody's going to want to take this job.
That's right. And that's exactly what I remind some folks is, these are often split-second decisions, and we're all human beings. And no one, I suspect, no one at this table, no one in your boardroom, you've got a board meeting that's about to take place, wants to protect bad cops.
Correct.
And it's only a small percentage of these forces, your force, and any force where there are bad actors. And by the way, that's any profession.
Any profession has
any profession.
Has yep.
No one wants to protect bad cops. But the vast majority of these tragic outcomes, and it is amazing how few tragic outcomes there are, given how many interactions take place between police and the community. But when those tragic outcomes occur, most of them, they weren't done out of malice. They're human.
Right.
And split-second decisions where you might think someone's about to attack you, and you've got to do something to protect yourself or your partner or someone in the community. And most of the time, the cop gets it right.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, because we're human, they don't.
Right.
And we can't just throw out every protection and lock that person up and take away their home and everything else because they made a good faith human error as they're trying to protect their community that they're tasked with protecting. If it's bad faith, throw the book at them.
Right. We'll agree with you.
Throw the book at them. And by the way, here in New York and in other parts of the country, when bad faith is identified, and we know the high-profile examples, there are lots of lower-profile examples that are not in the news over the years. Sometimes cops do get sent to jail, to prison.
And if you're acting in bad faith, you don't have qualified immunity anyway.
That's right.
Because it's not absolute immunity.
Correct. And so I take some bullets from activists and some others on this bill, not letting it out of my committee. But I agree with all of you and maintain it would devastate the police profession in New York State if that ever became law.
Do you think it's more like like an educational thing that they don't realize that what qualified immunity actually is? Or do you think that there's a malice intent behind the push to get rid of qualified immunity?
Look, just as we're talking about intentions as it relates to police officers, I don't want to prescribe what the intentions are of any colleagues who support this, or any activists who support this. And so I think the first step should always be education, even if it's not everyone or even most of the bill supporters who would be moved. I think at least some of them would or could be moved if given a better understanding as to what currently exists under the law and what the repercussions would be if this bill ever became law. And so that's where I would always start.
I think education is a great step. And I maybe I'm an optimist, but I think education can sometimes change a lot of hearts and minds. We speak frequently about our local Citizens Academy here in Suffolk County. And we've had several of our local electeds go through that Citizens Academy and go through an abbreviated version of a police academy to try to understand the training we go through, the difficult scenarios we're faced with. They'll use a simunition round gun and go into a use of force situation and decide, do I use force? Do I not use force? Do I use my weapon? Do I not use my weapon? And they'll see how quick you have to act before you're either dead or got it right or got it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's not even a real incident. Like, this is in real time.
Right. That's a controlled environment.
Yep.
They're just trying to simulate something.
That's great you guys offer that. I like that.
We also had the deputy inspector and captain on from the academy, and this academy, it also takes them on a ride along at the end of the academy.
Right.
So I said during the episode that really all of our elected officials should do at least one ride along, because I feel like then you understand
That's right.
what the cops are going through and what they deal with on a daily basis, at least for one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I like that.
Yeah. So
is that something unique, that Citizens Academy that you have here? I've never heard of that before.
So I don't know if it's unique to Suffolk County. I don't think every jurisdiction offers one. A lot of smaller jurisdictions, towns, villages, police departments,
they don't have something like that, of course,
because they don't necessarily even have their own police academy. They'll send their police officers to the state academy or to our academy.
Okay.
A lot of the East End towns, East Hampton Town, Southampton Town, Riverhead, their police officers go through our academy. So I guess it depends on which academy would be closest to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about what's going on in the state, some of the things you've already sponsored and helped us with, some of the things you're looking forward to preventing, like qualified immunity repeals. One of the things I do want to touch on, and we talked a little bit about it already with the national politics, is your recent consideration for being a DNC chair.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, and I speak about this openly, 20, 30 years ago, I might have been a registered Democrat. Currently today, I'm a registered Republican because of how far left the Democrats have moved. I don't think my views have changed. I think center has moved left. So I think having a moderate Democrat chairing the DNC is going to be very important into the future to not lose the party to this socialist agenda.
Yeah, and I ran for a number of reasons, knowing I was a long shot candidate, by the way. Like, I don't come from, the national party political scene. I don't travel in the DC cocktail circuit, as I called it. I'm just a state senator from New York who knows how to win elections, right? And knows how to talk with people and knows how to, I'd like to think, govern well. And we just need some more common sense brought into sort of our national apparatus if we're going to start seeming more relatable to people who currently view us as very unrelatable. And I mentioned the immigration example before. I'll give you another one. Obviously, the Trump campaign last election made transgender issues, especially as it relates to sports, school sports, a major part of their messaging, right? And regardless of what anyone thinks on that particular issue, and look, I live in a pretty typical suburban, exurban subdivision neighborhood in Orange County. And I've had a neighbor come up to me, and I'm sure there are Democrats all around the country who have had neighbors come up to them, when this was really hot during the presidential campaign, and were asked, like, what's the deal with this? Like, I've got a daughter who's like trying to get a scholarship, to go to XYZ college. And like, I'm seeing like some Democrats talk about like this, and like, I don't know, the response cannot be, and it too often was, well, that's bigoted. Like what you just said, like we need to engage with people's genuine concerns. Yeah. And by the way, like, the issue is very, very overblown. Just to talk about the substance for 1 second, in the sense that, Utah, very red state, right? Very, very conservative state in the country. They did a state study of just how frequently a transgender girl, someone who was born a boy and is a girl, transgender girl, is in a girls' sport at schools throughout the state of Utah. Do you know how many instances of it they found?
I'm sure it's very small.
One in the entire state. You would think, with the campaign rhetoric, like this is happening in every school district and like dozens and dozens of kids. It's just not. But like, there are two things. One, we come off sometimes as, we've talked about the working class perception here. We come off as too elitist sometimes as Democrats, where the political class and others think we know better than others. And when someone comes to us with a concern, it's at which like we might not agree with, instead of engaging and talking it through and trying to understand the concern and sympathize with the concern, we just sort of like dismiss it as, oh, well, you're this type of person instead. That is, one, morally wrong. That's just like being a bad neighbor. But two, it's also politically stupid. And so that's one. And then the other, and this is part of the elitism, and that's like where it always comes back to for me, is we come off as too elite as Democrats these days. And we really have to do better on this. The other is, we sometimes talk as though we're better suited running for university chancellor than we are running for public office as candidates occasionally. And it's like, the example I give is during the Biden years, inflation obviously was a major problem. It's still a problem, by the way, but it was a major problem when Biden was president. And the talking points were, well, if you look at inflation here on our GDP year over year, it's better than, the Western European countries, and like France's GDP was
this. Start cherry picking.
And like, not even just cherry picking. It's like, the average person is like, what the hell are you talking about? Right. I go to the grocery store and everything's more expensive. Don't talk to me about like GDP and like what France is doing, and like that's crazy talk. And so we need to be real with people again. Right. And I have to emphasize, I think the shift took place earlier on the Republican side, but the shift to the right was very real during those Tea Party years. And I think the Republican Party has sort of maintained their position on the political spectrum. Our shift is more recent, I think, but it's also, I think, real. And the last example I'll give, and this will be New York specific. I don't like congestion pricing. I know a lot of your members and a lot of residents in Suffolk County don't like congestion pricing. One of my main concerns, and we're very jealous of you out on Long Island, one of my main objections is that in Orange County, even though we're in the MTA region, we basically have no rail service. We have one rinky-dink little line that hardly runs at all. It runs to New Jersey. Then you've got to get off the train and take a different train. It's a caucus to get into Penn Station. You're very fortunate, as many issues and complaints people do occasionally have with the LIRR, compared to Orange County, like the gold standard of transit. But one of my arguments is, has been, a lot of my folks have to drive into New York City who commute because we don't have a real train.
Right.
And so it really bothered me. And again, from just a policy and just sort of like, a human perspective, but also politically stupid. When you may remember that when the cameras were turned on for congestion pricing, and I get it, there are some people who worked on this for many years. When those cameras were turned on, some of them literally in the streets of Manhattan popped champagne.
That's incredible.
And what were they popping for my people, for your people who are hit financially with something like this?
That's incredible.
You're popping champagne over a new toll? Like that's what, some Democrats are popping champagne over, a toll?
Right.
The average person looks at that and they're like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And again, there are policy reasons, there are policy justifications for something like this. We want to push people to take trains instead of driving, and pollution and congestion in New York City. And okay, I get it. We can disagree on that. We can agree or disagree on that. But at the end of the day, this is a toll. And you're celebrating with champagne while my constituents, who, by the way, have no train to get into New York City on, you now have to pay thousands of dollars every year to be able to commute into their jobs in New York City. That is tone deaf.
Yep.
That is elite. That's elitism. And that's where so much of our problem is in the Democratic Party.
Yeah. So even having the Long Island Railroad out here that goes right into Penn and has several stops in Queens en route, when I was a city cop, I was driving to work every day because as a police officer, you're not guaranteed to get out of work on time every day.
Yeah.
You don't know when you're going to have an arrest, when you're going to be stuck on a crime scene, when all of a sudden there's going to be some sort of protest that pops up and you have to stay for security reasons. You can't rely on a train schedule because you might be stuck there all day. And when you want to finally go home and try to get 5 hours of sleep before you have to go right back into work.
The next train's in an hour.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So a lot of police officers, even though the Long Island Railroad is there for them, we carpool to work.
Yep.
Right. We used to carpool from the train station so that way, if somebody did get stuck and it was just one of us, not all of us, there was at least the option to take the train back. But very often, if I was the one that got stuck, I opted to just sleep downstairs in the precinct because by the time I got home, I'm maybe looking at 2.5 hours sleep instead of getting 4.5, 5.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. And especially, there's some professions like we were talking about, nurses, another one, right? I mean, you might be getting out of work at 3 a.m., midnight, and there are far fewer trains running back and forth at midnight than there are during rush hour.
Right.
That's for sure.
Yeah, so the options aren't necessarily there for the people that don't work the typical 9 to 5 business hour job.
Right. I feel like the congestion pricing is like another tax for the middle class. Like it's basically like you're adding on another tax because they're the ones that are paying it.
Right. It's the working people that are going in and out.
And look, and this is my main gripe with congestion pricing. We needed to be more nuanced with it, right? Even if we were going to move forward with it, there needed to be accommodations for people like the ones we're talking about who are not the typical 9 to 5 or come from a part of the MTA region that doesn't have service like mine. And so I think there would have been a way to you're not going to make everybody okay with congestion pricing, but I think there would have been a way, instead of being cash greedy and trying to just funnel as much money as possible into this behemoth that is the MTA, sacrifice a little bit of that money to accommodate for people with genuine issues that are working a midnight shift, that are in Rockland or Orange counties west of the Hudson River and don't have real transit service. And, I think if they were able to do these, call them carve-outs, call them accommodations, you could have done a toll credit, by the way, for paying the congestion pricing toll, and you're in one of these categories. Create a credit against one of the other tolls that you're hitting along the way. There are a bunch of ways you could have done this, because for my people, they've got congestion pricing, but they've also got an $11 toll on George Washington Bridge.
Right.
Right? And they've got gas.
Yep.
I mean, you're talking about like a $40 commute every day now, round trip.
Right. And
That's
if you're working in the city, you're paying a city income tax too.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. I mean, a lot of people lose sight of that, because when I was a city cop, I was paying this extra city tax, even without having any voting rights or anything, right?
Yeah.
So we used to joke that it was taxation without representation. But with that said, that's a whole other aspect that these people that are commuting in and out of, they're already paying an additional income tax.
Yeah. Yeah. We deal with a lot of hard issues in New York State. And I understand for a lot of average voters, they view either policy outcomes as good outcome or bad outcome. And I get it. And it's usually through the lens of like how, if at all, it affects them or their household, their family. But some of these issues are very complex.
Yeah.
And it is incumbent upon us to come at these complex issues with surgical tools, not with flamethrowers. And on this, it was just dropping congestion pricing on the whole region, as opposed to more intelligently trying to create these nuances and respond to atypical types of either situations or different types of occupations. And I don't know if it's through lack of will. I don't know if it's through, again, because the MTA wanted to just hoard as much money as possible and not create any carve-outs or any credits. But I think a lot of folks, and including policymakers like myself, get frustrated when they see simple policy proposals or outcomes for very complex situations. We need to meet the complexity of issues with the intelligence and the carefulness, the cautiousness, and the judiciousness that sometimes they deserve.
Be careful. You're using common sense.
Yeah, I know.
So, one of the things you've also been very outspoken on within New York State is the annual budget process, right? So, and people see this in the news constantly. This year we had a very late budget. Part of the issue with our state budget is there's a lot of stuff involved that people wouldn't necessarily think is even money related or budget related.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues we're facing here in New York.
Yeah, it's true. We have a very, I don't know if it's unique, but it's a very strange process here in New York State government, where yes, one, to your point, when people think about budgets, usually they think about rightfully dollars and cents. We had, I think it was 4 policy issues that held up our budget this year. We had the latest budget in, I think it was 15, 16 years. We're a 6-month legislature, so we're in session the first 6 months of the year. And because the budget went so late till the end of May, it left us with a week and a half of the balance of session to focus on non-budget issues. Usually we have a couple of months because the budget process starts in January.
Right.
And so we had 4 issues that held up the budget. It wasn't dollars and cents. It was immigration and what should be done with, especially, ICE, which is a huge issue and very complicated. Talk about complex issues. That one's very complex. Second was auto insurance. There are a bunch of issues and reforms that were proposed on auto insurance. The third was something called seeker reform. These are the environmental rules that govern local governments and how they should be environmentally reviewing projects. And then the fourth was same or similar vein in the environment, reconsidering some of the climate law that passed in 2019. 4 policy items held up the budget this week to the latest budget in 16 years.
It's incredible.
And look, the one argument, and the governor has outsized power, and she would even tell you that in the budget negotiations. Outside the budget, we consider what bills we're going to pass. We consider the legislature what policy to advance. In the budget, that's when she gets to put policy on the table. And so the outcome here is that when you have a late budget like this year's, it really destabilizes the legislature's authority. And by the way, when you have those four, in this case, budget items that are policy items holding up everything else, it takes away from all the attention that should be put on the $250 billion plus spending that we're considering. When you're spending months and months talking about these four very complicated policy items, then you've got this short amount of time to consider, okay, what do we do with all the money that comes into New York State? And I'd say that's a pretty important bucket of issues that we should be dealing with. Look, every year people get frustrated. I think there was, in the legislature, there was a boiling point this year. There were people who I've never seen be frustrated about this budget process, express a lot of frustration about this year's budget process. Remains to be seen whether anything winds up changing ahead of next year's. I've been banging that drum for a long time that, I think there are things that we should be doing very differently to try and make this a process that makes more sense. But we'll see.
It's interesting to think about how some of these federal issues could hold up the New York State budget too, like ICE, right? Mm-hmm. And federal law enforcement and local law enforcement agencies working together. Because I've been a cop for 20 years, and it is invaluable to be able to work with law enforcement partners from other agencies. I mean, we have FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces. We have Marshal Services where it's multiple agencies working together, the drug task forces, multiple agencies working together. Out here in Suffolk County, there's an East End drug task force. So being able to cooperate with each other is very important in our view for public safety. And, we were hearing several times about rhetoric about ICE and, immigration laws. And, I understand that's a hot topic issue, but it's very important for the residents of New York State to know that the different levels of law enforcement should be able to cooperate with each other and should be able to work together, because federal law enforcement agencies might have different resources than a local town or village law enforcement agency.
Yeah. So let me say a couple of things. And this was a very complicated, very intense issue and negotiation, and one that I was quite involved in within the Senate. I view cooperation through two lenses, or put different types of cooperation in two different categories as it relates to ICE. The first is you've got a category of immigrants who came here illegally, and both categories we're talking people without documentation. The first, you've got people who, most of them, have lived here for more than a very short amount of time. In some cases, years, sometimes decades. They came here, wherever they came here, illegally, they're here. Their kids go to school. They live peaceably since arriving here. They've not broken any laws. They work. Contrary to some belief, most of them actually pay taxes. There's a federal, it's called ITIN, I-T-I-N. They get individual taxpayer ID numbers, which then gets them into the payroll tax system. And for that category, I don't want cooperation. And I don't want, ICE picking up folks who are living here peaceably, have roots in the community, that pay taxes. Their kids are next to our kids, citizen kids in classrooms. And some of them, and from my point of view, and I understand some folks on the right still might disagree with me on this, but from my point of view, I want to do everything that I can as a policymaker at the state level, knowing that there are limits to what I can do at the state level and we can do at the state level. But I want to do whatever I can do to protect that category of people from deportation. I don't believe that that's ICE's role, is to deport peaceable people who are here, just trying to live their lives. The second category of people are people who come here illegally and then cause a problem in our community. And I my perspective, I do not want to tie the hands of any law enforcement agencies to be able to, whatever word you want to use, talk to ICE, coordinate with ICE, email with ICE, work with ICE. I don't want to constrain law enforcement agencies from working to deport that category of individuals. And so, again, it's a very complex issue because legally and otherwise, but that's kind of where it boils down for me. That's where I delineate. And let's talk facts, because I think, there's a lot of rhetoric on this issue. It's a third, a third, a third. A third of the people being deported in the United States have a criminal history. A third have pending criminal charges. So 2/3 either have pending criminal charges or have been convicted of a crime since arriving in New York, or the country, I should say. And then a third do not have any pending charges nor have any criminal history. So that first category is that last group. A third of the people being deported are that first category I'm talking about. And I have deep sympathy for that category. I don't know why that category is being deported. And the Trump administration, and I'm going to say something, and look, we're talking a lot of politics here. Mm-hmm. I've been beating up on my party a lot. The Trump administration would have people believe that no one is being deported who's not a criminal. It's just not true. A third of the deportations are. A third have pending charges. A lot of them will probably be convicted of some crime. Some of them, I'm guessing, will not. And then, there are a third that have a criminal history. And so where we landed, I think, was in a responsible place on this issue in the budget. And this is the place that I push for that I'm largely describing here, which is we do not come in as a New York State government and tell any law enforcement agency that when they charge someone with a crime, not a violation. I think if someone is pulled over for a broken taillight and they happen to be someone without documentation, I don't think any cop should pick up the phone and call ICE because they picked up someone with a broken taillight. If they're charged with a crime, there's literally nothing that we did that constrains local law enforcement in New York State from coordinating with ICE. Literally nothing. There are going to be some people out there who are going to try and make believe and tell people that we did. We did not. That is a fact. If someone's charged with a crime, unless there's a local law, like New York City, they've got their own sanctuary state local law that they passed. And their, Ithaca, I think, has a local law, and a couple of the cities upstate have local laws. So that's different. But if you don't have a county law or a local law that puts up those restrictions, we did not do anything to prevent you guys in Suffolk County, any of your town or village police departments, from being able to call ICE if you've just booked somebody and you've charged them with a crime. Literally nothing. But if, you guys or any law enforcement agency just happens to know, hey, that guy who lives in that house, I know he's here illegally, hasn't been charged with a crime, hasn't done anything wrong, that's when there cannot be a phone call to ICE. But if you charge them with a crime, I don't want to do anything, and we did not do anything that constrains your ability to work with ICE to get bad people out of our state.
So to be clear, if somebody is arrested for a crime, not a violation, a crime, misdemeanor or felony.
Correct.
And they have an illegal immigration status here, mm-hmm. There's nothing preventing ICE from, say, coming to a courthouse or a jail and deporting that person who has criminal charges.
Well, so that is correct. With one, I'll make one correction, and that is that it has been law for quite some time that in state courts, ICE cannot enter state courthouses and arrest someone on immigration matters. And so state courthouses have been kind of off limits for many years. That's not new. Otherwise, your statement is completely correct. Yes, okay. Whether it's a jail, whether it's your local police department, they can go there. They can pick up the phone. The agency can pick up the phone. There can be coordination. Any misdemeanor, any felony.
I think a lot of our viewers are going to be happy to hear that, because we do have a very big problem here in Suffolk County with MS-13. And a lot of those MS-13 bad actors do have illegal immigration status here. That I think that's good to hear. I think it's an important message for our viewership to hear.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there from some politicians, unfortunately, that has tried to cloud this issue. But everything that I just said is complete. No question, no gray area, no, maybe that is what I just said is complete fact, without dispute.
And you know what I like about discussions like this? Because no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter how you feel about, say, those people with the illegal status, but maybe they are living a productive life, they're going to work every day, have kids in the schools, at least we could have a conversation about the other 2/3 that we agree on.
Yeah.
If they're out here victimizing New Yorkers, victimizing Americans, they should be thrown out.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that everybody starts to focus on the stuff we do agree on.
Yeah, that's right.
It's reasonable.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of harping on that third that we're disagreeing on, let's work on the other 2/3 that we agree on.
That's right. Agreed. And look, unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer opportunities like the ones that we're having right now in society. Because, and social media is a big part of it, where, look, even when I started in the state legislature and the assembly 14 years ago, in the 14 years since then, I've noticed how more entrenched people are in their sort of partisan, it's almost like warfare politics, right? And I continue to do my best to try and have conversations like this, but it is harder and harder. One, there are fewer venues like this one. This is, you bring people on to this podcast and we have these conversations. There are fewer venues that are willing to do something like this. But even individuals themselves, it's harder to get people to, they watch MSNBC, they watch Fox News, they get information from one side, and then, approaching them with a different angle. And a lot of people are just dismissive, like, oh, that's not true.
It becomes like a prideful thing. I feel like you're saying, these media outlets are skewing everything to the far right, to the far left. And then people are like, I completely agree with this, or I completely agree with that. I think government should really work together. Like the party should be irrelevant when you go up there to get stuff done for good. Yeah, it should be issue based, and everybody should work together for the best results.
Yeah, that's
what I'd love to see.
Yeah, that's what I'd love to see too.
Yeah. So I hope the big message that comes out of this is, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, let's work on the stuff we all kind of agree about. Yeah. You know what I mean? We can make some positive changes in this state, in this country, if we focus on the stuff that the vast majority of Americans agree is a problem.
And not only the vast majority of Americans agree is a problem or a solution, but I would argue the vast majority of issues have support from the large majority of Americans and New Yorkers. Right. And like I said before, that my line, 95% want repaved roads, good hospitals, good schools, safe communities, and some tax relief. Right. I'd say Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature, maybe we have a little bit of different ways to get to those outcomes, but broadly, those are the things that we want too, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. But instead, because politics has become just so conflict-based, and it's like, okay, we've got to kill them because the next election is, around the corner. We can't be seen agreeing. We've got to be seeing drawing lines of distinction ahead of the next election. We'll focus on the minority of issues or minority proposals that there is strong disagreement on and spend no time talking about the 90-95% that we do agree on. That's sadly what politics has become today.
Yeah, Senator, I thank you for coming on and being so open with a lot of your views on what's going on in New York and America. I think it's important for people to be able to hear from you and get that kind of message. I do just want to mention quickly, we had Rich Schaefer on a few months back, the Democratic Party chair here in Suffolk County, and he had mentioned that he longs for the years of when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would debate issues out on the floor, but then get together and have a drink and dinner afterwards, because you could have civil conversation and debate without, as you put it, two extremes just kind of always battling and butting heads.
Yeah, and it's not even so. Yes, we've talked a lot about how there are far left and far right elements in politics, and it's very front and center, especially since our primary this past Tuesday. But I think the problem, the uncivil nature of politics extends beyond just how left or right some people have become, and look, it's the parties writ large themselves. You had, regardless of how you feel about the New York primaries that just occurred. You had the National Republican Party put a bouquet of sympathy flowers in Hakeem Jeffries' office down in Washington, D.C., like mourning this, minority leader Jeffries. Some of his candidates lost, the primaries, and there's the natural response from the opposition party, the Republican Party, was, let's make fun of him. Let's mock him. Let's get something that, a post that'll get 100,000 likes on Twitter from, our base. Uncivility is off the charts. So forget about even just like, Democrats are more left and Republicans are more right. The parties have chosen to just be in this perpetual state of warfare. How do you get a drink with, someone when, the other person is doing what I just described?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Senator, thank you for coming on. I think that's a great way to leave off. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing all the stuff you accomplish in the future.
Looking forward to continue to work with you guys. And thanks to all your members.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.